Hi, I'm Heather Hubbles. I'm introducing my action research project for EL 615. My action research project is how visual aids enhance language skills of students with developmental disabilities. In this study, I used 5th graders, special education students from Central Middle School in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. They have been in a self-contained classroom for learning disabilities in the areas of basic reading, reading comprehension, and written expression. I wanted to discover in my action research study whether visuals benefited a student when they were learning a new passage, new vocabulary, or helps with their expressive skills. The purpose of this study is to look at I introduced new vocabulary, I introduced a new passage. I wanted to see if visuals with my students, if it helped them learn newly introduced vocabulary, comprehend key story elements, and if it could enhance their expressive language of answering questions. I did this in various passages in my study. 3 questions that I wanted to look at while I was doing my action research was: how do visual aids help students with disabilities comprehend new vocabulary? How will visual study aids help students with disabilities comprehend story elements? And how will visual aids impact the expressive language of students with disabilities? In my study, I had 12 5th grade students here at Central Middle School. 2 were 10-year-olds, 9 were 11-year-olds, and I had 1 student that was 12. Of the 9 students, I had 9 that were boys and 3 that were girls. I did the study in my special education classroom, one that was familiar to the students all year long. I had present during this study myself, my 12 students, and my paraprofessional. Interventions. I had two steps or 2 phases to this. The first phase was giving a 2-story passage or a 2-page passage to my students along with 10 vocabulary words without any visuals. Then I presented this same passage with visuals attached to the story and to the vocabulary word. At that point, I collected data. I compared the results from the use of visuals with the use of non-visuals and was able to come to some really great conclusions. On my data sources, I used 3 different passages. They were on a 5th grade level, so they were able to easily be read by my students. I did a pre-test off of all the passages, and I did a post-test on all the passages. The pre-test was given without any visuals. It was text only. So the students were allowed to read through that, complete that, and complete the vocabulary, along with there were some expressive language questions that they had to go in more detail over. Once I scored the pre-test, I then was able to give the students the post-test. But between the pre and the post-test, I was given the same passage and the same vocabulary with key pictures that would allow the students to have a better understanding of what the passage was and what the actual vocabulary was. After the 3 trials, I used a student survey, and I asked the students how they preferred to have their delivery of passages, whether they liked using the visuals in the passage, did they not like it, whether they wanted hands-on. So I was able to get a better idea how the students like to learn. With the information and the data I was able to get, I saw 3 areas. First, I looked at visuals versus no visuals. And my passages along the bottom here are April Fools. These are the names of the passages. Wishing Well and Locked Out. In the visuals versus no visuals, there was a great increase in the use of visuals versus no visuals. For example, in April Fools, without visuals, my students scored a 44% versus an 84% on that. Moving over here for areas of comprehension, which would be my vocabulary, or excuse me, how the students understood. In that same story, my students averaged a 42% without visuals, and with visuals a 78%. And those scores kept continuously increasing with the use of visuals. In the area of expressive language, for example, that same story, 36% the students scored without visuals versus 78% with visuals. With having this kind of key information, the research clearly shows that the use of visual aids as a teaching method improves the comprehension in students. This research also shows that the use of visual aids as a teaching method improves the understanding of unknown vocabulary. It also shows that students' expressive language abilities increase with the use of visuals. My data also shows that students prefer to be able to learn new information with the use of visuals. The most preferred method for a student was to be able to not only see the material, but hear and use hands-on activities. The present research gave insight on my students' perceptions and opinions on the use of visual aids and resources. However, it is important to remember and take into consideration the child's disability. For example, if they have visual or hearing disability, that would be needed to take into consideration. Future plans in my own classroom, how I would like to use my information from my action research study. I want to be able to read passage, making sure that I incorporate visuals with all my new passages I introduce to my students. When introducing vocabulary, I want to make sure that there's a picture that's introduced along with the vocabulary. When working on worksheets or working out problems, I want to make sure I use my document camera or some way to project what we're working on so the kids can not only hear what I'm saying to them, but they can also see it. I also want to utilize Google Images to attach images to stories, unknown vocabulary, so students will not only be able to see the written word, but will also be able to see the word through visuals. I also want to make sure I utilize whiteboards, PowerPoints, and video when applicable in each of my lessons, not only to help the children understand, but to get in a more in-depth knowledge of the passage they're reading and the vocabulary that's being presented. I want to thank you so much for listening to my action research project.